The storm outside rages violently, its thunderous roars drowning out the murmurs of conversation inside the vast Armitage estate. At the grand window overlooking the sprawling grounds, Lord Armitage stands rigid, his face a study of power, age, and control. The rain pelts against the glass, but inside, the family remains unaware of how fragile their empire truly is. Theodore, his son, steps forward cautiously, the weight of the world upon his shoulders. "Father, the rumors of betrayal are growing louder," he said, his voice tinged with fear and suspicion. Lord Armitage remained motionless, eyes fixed on the storm. "Rumors are nothing but noise," he muttered, his voice as cold and unyielding as the storm itself. "Power, Theodore, power is the only truth that matters." The thunder cracked again, the tension thick as the air around them grew heavy with unspoken words. The legacy of the Armitage family, once untouchable, was now teetering on the brink of disaster. The next day, the air inside the estate is thick with quiet unease. Theodore walks alone through the grand hall, the weight of his father's words still heavy in his chest. The mansion, once full of vibrant life, now feels like a tomb, its grandeur a reminder of everything at risk. As he reaches the library, he finds Helena there, seated with a worried expression. "The estate's value is dropping," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The rumors, they're not just rumors anymore, the business is crumbling." Theodore stands frozen, staring at her, disbelief etched across his face. "This isn't how it was supposed to be, Helena. We were meant to rule, forever." She shakes her head, her eyes brimming with sadness. "We are already losing, Theodore. The empire is no longer ours to hold." The family gathers for dinner, but the usual atmosphere of opulence and comfort is gone. Lord Armitage sits at the head of the table, his face unreadable as he slowly sips his wine. Across from him, Theodore and Helena exchange troubled glances. The quiet clinking of silverware, the only sound in the room. Finally, Theodore can no longer stay silent. "Father," he said sharply, "we can't continue like this. We're losing everything. Can't you see?" Lord Armitage places his glass down slowly, his gaze steady. "You are naive, Theodore," he said coldly. "The empire demands sacrifice. You'll understand when you're older." The words fall heavy, and Theodore's frustration boils over. "At what cost, father? At what cost?" The storm outside intensifies as Lord Armitage stands by the grand fireplace, his figure casting long shadows on the stone walls. Theodore approaches, determined. "You don't understand, father," he said, his voice desperate. "The empire is crumbling around us." Lord Armitage looks at him, his eyes hard as stone. "I understand more than you think," he muttered. "You're just not ready to see it." The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Theodore could feel the anger bubbling inside him. "The family, father, we're falling apart." Lord Armitage remained silent, the crackle of the fire the only answer. For a long moment, neither spoke. Theodore receives an anonymous letter, its contents revealing a meeting between rival factions, intent on toppling the Armitage Empire. His hands tremble as he reads the final words. "We are already losing, Theodore," he whispers, his voice barely audible. He hurries down the hallway to find his father, but when he bursts into Lord Armitage's study, the room is empty. In his place is only the cold, empty space of the grand office. Theodore stands motionless, holding the letter, realizing that his father may already be too far gone. The empire, once invincible, is now on the brink of destruction. Days pass, and the weight of the family's impending collapse grows heavier. The estate is no longer filled with the sounds of lively conversation or laughter. Instead, it is drowned by the echo of uncertainty. Theodore stands by the window in the grand library, his gaze distant. The same storm that tore at the mansion's exterior now mirrors the unrest inside. Helena enters quietly, her face pale from sleepless nights. "Father hasn't been the same," she said softly, her voice betraying her fear. "The rumors about our business, it's worse than we thought." Theodore turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Then we take action," he said, determination building in his chest. We can't wait any longer. Helena hesitated, her expression filled with sorrow. Do you really think we can save it, Theodore? Or are we just delaying the inevitable? Theodore clenched his fists, the frustration of his helplessness building to a breaking point. I won't let this empire fall, he declared, though even he wasn't sure he believed his own words. The meeting was set for late in the evening, as the family's financial advisors gathered in a darkened room to discuss the crisis. Theodore and Helena entered the room, their faces resolute despite the stormy uncertainty that clouded their minds. The long table was covered in financial documents, all detailing the disastrous state of the estate's holdings. Our creditors are circling, one advisor said nervously, his voice shaking. If we don't act soon, we'll lose everything. Theodore's gaze was cold, his mind racing through possibilities. What if we liquidate the assets? What if we sell off parts of the estate? He suggested, his voice low but urgent. The room fell silent. Lord Armitage, still the patriarch, sat at the head of the table. His eyes remained fixed on the papers in front of him, his mind seemingly elsewhere. Finally he spoke, his voice cold. We'll not let the Armitage name be sold off like cattle. We find another way. Late into the night, Theodore walked the empty hallways of the mansion, the echoes of his footsteps resonating through the silence. His thoughts were a storm within him, battling between the future of his family and his own sense of morality. The letter he had received days before, warning of the betrayal within their ranks, gnawed at him. He couldn't let it go. As he passed by his father's study, he saw a faint light flickering through the cracks of the door. Curiosity got the better of him, and he quietly pushed it open. Inside, he found Lord Armitage standing by his desk, examining a letter. The patriarch looked up, his face hardened. You shouldn't be here, Theodore, he said coldly. Theodore stepped into the room, his eyes searching his father's face. What are you hiding, father? What's in that letter? Lord Armitage's gaze didn't shift. Some things are better left unseen. The confrontation between father and son escalates in the dim light of the study. Lord Armitage slowly placed the letter down on the desk and looked at Theodore. You're not ready to know the truth, Theodore, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. This empire, it's built on more than just wealth. It's built on promises, on sacrifices, on deals that cannot be undone. Theodore stepped forward, his frustration boiling over. You're hiding something from me. All this time I've trusted you, and now you're telling me that we're going to lose everything, and you won't even tell me why. The air between them crackled with tension, the weight of the unspoken truth suffocating them both. Lord Armitage's eyes darkened. Some things are beyond your control, my son, he said, his voice growing colder. You'll understand when it's too late. The days following the confrontation were filled with whispers and uncertainty. Theodore couldn't shake the feeling that his father was withholding something vital. Late one night, he found himself standing in front of the old family vault, the key heavy in his pocket. The vault, a relic of the Armitage legacy, was said to hold their most sacred treasures, papers, contracts, and promises that had sustained the family through generations. As the door creaked open, a musty smell filled his nostrils. Inside, among the papers, he found something he wasn't prepared for. A series of documents detailing secret deals with rival families, betrayal, and even crimes committed in the name of power. His stomach twisted as he realized the true cost of the empire he had fought to preserve. His father's empire was built on a foundation of lies. And now, it was too late to change anything. The pressure weighing on the Armitage family has reached its breaking point. Theodore sits in his father's study, his hands shaking as he stares at the documents in front of him. The evidence of his family's past sins is laid out before him. Secret deals with rival families, bribery, and even underhanded dealings to maintain their wealth and power. The weight of the truth is almost too much to bear. As he sits in the dimly lit room, the door creaks open. Helena enters, her eyes wide with concern. Theodore, what have you found? She asked, her voice trembling. Theodore doesn't look up. Everything we've built is built on lies, Helena, he whispered. Everything. And now it's too late to fix it. Helena steps forward, her hand resting on his shoulder. Then we fight, Theodore. We expose everything. We can't let this destroy us. But Theodore shakes his head, the fight draining from him. I don't know if we can win this war. It feels like we're already losing. Theodore's mind races as he contemplates the revelations in front of him. The storm outside seems to mirror his inner turmoil, the rain hammering against the windows. He stands up abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. We can't let this happen, Helena. We have to confront Father. He's the one who did all this, he says, his voice filled with frustration. Helena steps back, her expression troubled. You don't understand, Theodore. Father is already in too deep. He's compromised and he'll never let us tear this empire down. He'll do whatever it takes to protect it. Theodore pauses, his face hardening. Then we have no choice but to take matters into our own hands, he said grimly. We expose everything, no matter the cost. The next day, tensions in the estate are palpable. The family gathers for dinner, but the once familiar air of camaraderie has been replaced with suspicion and fear. Lord Armitage, seated at the head of the table, does not meet his children's eyes. Theodore, unable to hold back his anger, slams his hand on the table. This empire, our empire, was built on lies, Father, he shouted. You've betrayed everything we stand for and now it's crumbling. The room falls silent, the weight of Theodore's words hanging in the air like a suffocating fog. Lord Armitage finally looks up, his gaze steely. You don't understand, Theodore. Sacrifices were made, you'll see in time. But Theodore's anger flares. No more lies, no more secrets, we're done. The family members exchange looks, their faces a mix of fear and guilt as the empire begins to crumble from within. That night, Theodore walks alone through the dark halls of the mansion, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts and doubts. The sound of his footsteps echoes in the empty corridors, the walls closing in around him. He stops in front of the family vault, the key in his pocket heavy with the weight of the truth. With trembling hands he unlocks the door. Inside, the room is filled with ancient artifacts and family heirlooms, but it is the documents that draw his attention. The vault contains evidence of more than just the Armitage legacy. It holds the proof of their greatest betrayal. Theodore pulls out the papers, his hands shaking as he reads them. The deal with rival families was far deeper than he realized, implicating his father in crimes that could destroy everything. He slams the papers down on a table, his heart racing. This ends now, he mutters, realizing that to stop the collapse, he must destroy the empire that has held his family together for generations. The family gathers one final time to discuss their future. The air in the room is thick with resentment and fear. Theodore, holding the incriminating documents in his hand, steps forward. This is it. This is the truth. Our father made deals that betrayed our family, our legacy. We can't let him continue to ruin everything. Helena's face pales as she looks at the documents. But exposing this, it will destroy us. We'll lose everything. Theodore's eyes are resolute. Then we fight for something better. We fight for what's right. Lord Armitage stands up from his seat, his voice cold and unwavering. You don't know what you're doing. You don't understand the cost of tearing everything down. But Theodore stands tall, defiant. The cost is already too high, and I will make sure the truth is known, no matter the price. The tension between father and son reaches a boiling point, the empire now on the verge of its ultimate destruction. The days following the confrontation have only worsened. The storm that once represented the turmoil outside now mirrors the chaos inside the Armitage estate. Theodore has become increasingly isolated, locked away in the study, obsessively going over the family's documents and secrets. The weight of the betrayal gnaws at him, but he knows that exposing the truth is the only way to end this. Helena, looking increasingly worn and tired, approaches him one evening as he stares blankly at the piles of papers before him. Theodore, you're going to destroy us, she says, her voice shaking with fear. Father is not going to let this go. You're walking straight into a war. Theodore looks up at her, his expression hard. Then let it be a war. I'm done hiding from the truth. We've lived on lies for too long, Helena. This is the only way to save what's left of our family. Helena steps back, fear and sadness in her eyes. You've already lost, Theodore. The cost of the truth is too high. Theodore's decision to expose the truth comes at a great cost. As the days wear on, the family begins to splinter. Lord Armitage, feeling the walls closing in, has taken drastic measures to secure the Empire's survival. He meets in secret with his most trusted allies, plotting to stop his son from revealing the family's darkest secrets. In the dead of night, Theodore is summoned to his father's study. The air is thick with tension as Lord Armitage waits behind his desk, his eyes cold. "You've gone too far, Theodore," he says, his voice laced with danger. "If you release those documents, you'll destroy everything. Your name, our legacy, our future, gone in an instant." Theodore stands firm, his voice unwavering. "If we lose everything, then so be it. We've already lost our soul." Lord Armitage stands up, his anger evident. "Then prepare yourself, Theodore. This war is far from over." As the days pass, the estate becomes more volatile. The whispers of a battle brewing grow louder, and it is clear that the family's once unified front has crumbled. The tensions come to a head during a heated family dinner. Lord Armitage, now more desperate than ever, raises his glass to the family, his voice tight. "To the future," he says, his tone forced and cold. "May we find a way to rebuild." Theodore slams his fist down on the table. "Rebuild? There is nothing to rebuild, Father. You've destroyed it all with your greed and lies." The room falls silent. The other family members shift uncomfortably in their seats, unsure where their loyalties lie. Lord Armitage glares at his son, his grip tightening on his glass. "You've gone too far, Theodore. You will regret this." The once powerful patriarch's voice cracks with the realization that his empire is truly on the brink of collapse. With each passing day, the Armitage family's foundation crumbles. The estate's financial collapse has been swift, and there's no escaping the inevitable. Theodore, now fully committed to exposing the truth, takes the final step. He arranges a public announcement, intending to reveal the documents and expose his father's dealings. On the night before the announcement, he is approached by one of his father's allies, who warns him that the family's enemies are closing in. "You don't understand, Theodore," the ally says, his voice low. "Your father's power is more dangerous than you know. If you do this, it won't just be your name you're destroying. It will be your life." Theodore stands firm, his gaze unwavering. "I will not back down. The truth will come to light, no matter the cost." The ally sighs, shaking his head, but he leaves without further protest. Theodore knows what he must do, but the weight of the decision presses down on him. The day of the announcement arrives, and the air is thick with anticipation. Theodore, standing before a group of journalists and business associates, holds the documents that will expose the family's darkest secrets. His heart races as he begins to speak. "The Armitage family has thrived on secrets and lies for too long," he says, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "The empire we built is not one of honor, but one of betrayal." The room falls silent as the audience digests his words. Lord Armitage, standing in the back of the room, watches in stunned silence, his face pale and cold. As Theodore finishes his speech and places the documents on the table, the realization of what has been lost begins to sink in. The family, once an unshakable pillar of power, has now been reduced to rubble. Theodore steps back, his heart heavy, knowing there's no turning back now. The aftermath of the press conference lingers in the air like a toxic fog. Theodore walks the empty halls of the mansion, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. The mansion, once alive with the bustle of wealth and power, now feels eerily silent. His father has been quiet, locked away in his study for hours, perhaps reflecting on what's been lost. Theodore's mind is a battleground. He knows the consequences of his actions, but there's no turning back. He stops in front of his father's door, hesitating. The sound of his own heartbeat echoes in his ears as he finally knocks. "Come in," Lord Armitage's voice comes, cold and resigned. As Theodore steps inside, he sees his father sitting at his desk, papers scattered before him like the remnants of a shattered empire. "You've ruined us, Theodore," his father says, his voice barely above a whisper. Theodore takes a deep breath, his resolve unwavering. No, father, you ruined us long before this. The confrontation between father and son is inevitable. Lord Armitage looks up at his son, his face weathered and filled with a mixture of sorrow and anger. I built this empire, Theodore. I sacrificed everything for it, he says, his voice shaking with emotion. And you, with a few words, have torn it all apart. Theodore stands firm, his expression cold and resolute. You built it on lies, father. On manipulation. The truth was always going to come out. Lord Armitage stands slowly, his hands trembling with rage. You don't understand, he says, his voice cracking. The world doesn't forgive weakness. Theodore's eyes narrow. Then, let the world see what we've become, he says quietly. Let them see the truth. Theodore's decision has set off a chain of events. The once loyal allies of the Armitage family now distance themselves, sensing the instability that has begun to seep through the estate. The pressure mounts as business deals collapse, creditors demand their dues, and whispers of betrayal echo in the city. Theodore, now fully aware of the price of his actions, watches the unraveling of everything he once held dear. Helena, struggling to maintain her composure, confronts him in the empty mansion halls. What have we done, Theodore? She asks, her voice breaking. We've lost everything. Father's not the man he once was. He's gone, Theodore. We've lost him. Theodore runs a hand through his hair, his face tired and worn. I never had a choice, Helena. I had to do it. We couldn't keep living this lie. Helena falls silent, tears welling up in her eyes. I wanted to believe there was another way, she whispers. But now I see, we've crossed a line we can't come back from. As the family's collapse becomes inevitable, Theodore finds himself standing alone in the grand drawing room. The estate, once a symbol of their power, now feels like a hollow shell. He stares out the window at the city below, the lights flickering like stars in the distance. The weight of everything he's lost presses down on him. As he turns to leave the room, he's stopped by the sudden appearance of Lord Armitage. The old man's face is gaunt, his once proud posture now slumped. You've taken everything from me, Theodore, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. Theodore stands still, his eyes filled with sorrow. No, father, you took everything from yourself. The words hang in the air, and for a moment, the two men simply stand in silence, the devastation of their family's collapse settling around them like dust. The day of reckoning has arrived. The public backlash is fierce, and the family's financial collapse is complete. Theodore stands in the ruins of what was once their grand estate, surrounded by the wreckage of their empire. The media has seized on the scandal, and the once proud Armitage name is now synonymous with corruption and deceit. As he walks through the empty halls of the mansion, he reflects on the choices he made, the people he lost, and the legacy that can never be restored. Helena joins him, her face a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. What now? She asks softly. Theodore looks at her, his face tired but resolute. Now we rebuild, he says quietly. But not the empire. We rebuild ourselves. The weight of the past will never leave them, but for the first time, Theodore feels a sense of freedom, freedom from the lies, from the empire that once defined them. They have lost everything, but perhaps in the rubble, they can find something new. Months have passed since the Armitage Empire crumbled. Theodore and Helena have retreated into the shadows, keeping their heads low as the world's gaze remains fixated on the fall of their family. The estate is now a shell, a reminder of the vast wealth and power they once held. Yet, despite the ruins around him, Theodore is not broken. He walks through the overgrown gardens of the estate, the once manicured lawns now wild with neglect. He stops in front of a crumbling stone fountain, his eyes filled with contemplation. We're free, Helena, he says softly, almost to himself. But we've lost everything that mattered. Helena approaches from behind, her steps measured. We've lost the empire, Theodore, she responds quietly, but we haven't lost ourselves. The world may think we're finished, but we still have a chance to rebuild, not the empire but our lives. Theodore looks up at the decaying mansion in the distance. Maybe rebuilding is all that matters now. A few weeks later, Theodore and Helena have moved into a small, modest house in the outskirts of the city, far from the shadows of their former life. The silence that once filled the grand halls of their mansion has been replaced by a new kind of quiet, one that feels more like freedom. Helena stands at the small kitchen window, gazing out at the street as the sun sets. "We're starting over, Theodore," she says quietly, her voice filled with a quiet resolve. "But can we truly leave it all behind?" Theodore walks up behind her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We have no choice," he replies softly. "What else can we do? We can't erase the past, but we can choose what we do next." Helena turns to face him, her eyes softening. "I've never seen you so certain." He smiles faintly, the weight of their shared history still heavy on his shoulders. "Maybe because, for the first time, I'm not carrying the weight of an empire." Despite their attempt to move on, the weight of their past is never far from their thoughts. One evening, as Theodore sits at the kitchen table, going through some legal documents about their diminished estate, he hears a knock at the door. He opens it to find an old associate of his father's, a man named Grayson, standing in the doorway. Grayson's face is worn, his eyes shadowed with secrets. "Theodore, I know this isn't what you want," he begins, his voice low, "but there are still people who want to see you back in the game." Theodore's face hardens. "I'm done with that life," he replies sharply. "No more power, no more lies." Grayson steps forward, lowering his voice. "It's not about power, Theodore. It's about survival. People will come for what's left of the Armitage name." Theodore takes a deep breath, the weight of the past pressing in on him. "And what would you have me do, Grayson?" he asks quietly. "Rebuild the empire?" Grayson's expression darkens. "It's already been rebuilt, but not by you." Grayson's words linger in the air, and Theodore can't shake the feeling that the past is coming for him, no matter how hard he tries to escape it. The next day, as he walks through the city, he is confronted by a group of men, a mixture of former allies and enemies of his father's empire. They surround him in a dark alleyway, their faces cold and unforgiving. "You thought you could run away, Theodore?" one of them sneers. "The Armitage name doesn't die that easily." Theodore stands tall, his hands clenched into fists. "I'm not my father," he says firmly. "I'm not going to fight for something that's already dead." The men laugh, their eyes full of malice. "The game's not over yet, Theodore," one of them says. "And you're still playing." Theodore takes a deep breath, preparing for whatever comes next. "I'll play it my way," he says, a new determination in his voice. "But this time I play by my own rules." The confrontation in the alleyway marks a turning point for Theodore. As the men disappear into the shadows, leaving him standing alone, he realizes that he cannot outrun his legacy, no matter how much he wishes to leave it behind. He returns to his modest home, his mind racing with the weight of his choices. Helena is waiting for him, her face filled with worry. "What happened?" she asks softly. Theodore walks past her, his movement slow and heavy. "It's not over, Helena," he says quietly. "There are people who will never let us go." Helena stands up, her voice firm. "Then we face them together," she says, her eyes meeting his. Theodore turns to her, his face softening. "I don't know if I can keep fighting." Helena steps closer, taking his hand. "Then we fight together," she repeats, a promise in her voice. For the first time in a long while, Theodore feels a glimmer of hope, realizing that the future may still hold something worth fighting for. The days following the confrontation in the alleyway are filled with uncertainty. Theodore knows that his past will not let go of him so easily. The city is buzzing with whispers of his involvement, and the walls of their new life seem to be closing in. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight fade into the horizon, Theodore stands by the window, looking out over the city. "Helena," he calls softly. She enters the room, her face filled with worry. "We've tried, haven't we?" she says quietly. Theodore looks back at her, his expression heavy. "We've tried to leave it behind, but it's like the past is chasing us no matter how fast we run." Helena moves closer, placing a hand on his arm. "Then we face it together," she says softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. Theodore's lips twitch into a faint smile. Maybe you're right, he replies. Maybe it's time to stop running and face whatever comes next. The following morning, Theodore receives an unexpected visitor, an old adversary from his father's past, now standing at the doorstep. The man, dressed in a dark suit and a cold expression, steps forward with a briefcase in hand. "Theodore Armitage," the man says flatly, "you've made a mistake. The truth always comes at a price." Theodore stands in the doorway, his gaze hardening. "I've already paid the price," he responds, his voice low and steady. "But I'm done running from it." The man raises an eyebrow, a twisted smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You think you can walk away from this, don't you? The empire is dead, but the influence remains, and so do the consequences." Theodore takes a deep breath, his fists clenching at his sides. "If you've come here to threaten me, you'll find I have nothing left to lose." The man's warning lingers in Theodore's mind, gnawing at him through the day. But as the hours pass, it becomes clear that the old adversaries are not giving up easily. That night, Theodore sits with Helena in their small living room, his eyes distant. "They won't stop," he says, his voice heavy with frustration. "We can't escape it, Helena. The past is still out there, waiting for us." Helena sits beside him, her hand resting on his. "You can't change the past, Theodore," she says gently. "But you can control what happens next." Theodore looks at her, his eyes searching for the strength that she so effortlessly gives. "I never thought I'd end up here," he murmurs. "I thought we'd be free." Helena gives him a sad smile. "Freedom doesn't come easy, Theodore, but it's worth fighting for." The tension finally comes to a head when Theodore decides to confront his old enemies, once and for all. With Helena by his side, he arranges a meeting at a secluded location, where the people who once held sway over his family's empire still gather. The atmosphere is tense as he steps into the room, his eyes meeting those of his father's old associates. "I'm done hiding," Theodore says firmly, his voice echoing in the cold, sterile room. "You wanted to use my family's name for your gain, but I'm taking control now." One of the men, a familiar face from his father's past, laughs darkly. "You think you have the power now, Theodore? You're nothing without the legacy." Theodore stands tall, unwavering. "I'm everything without it," he says, his voice low but filled with strength. "I've learned that much." The final confrontation is swift, but its impact is undeniable. Theodore's declaration of independence shakes the foundation of the empire his father built. As the dust settles, the men who once controlled the Armitage legacy have lost their influence, and Theodore stands victorious, albeit exhausted. Helena stands beside him, her face a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. "We've done it," she says quietly. Theodore looks at her, his expression unreadable at first. Then a faint smile tugs at the corners of his lips. "We've survived," he replies, "and we'll build something new. Not on power, not on lies, but on truth." They stand in silence for a moment, the weight of the past finally lifting. The future is uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, Theodore feels the weight of freedom.